Karen Whitfield grabbed the meal tray and slammed it down in front of the blind woman so hard the fork bounced off the plate. She didn't care. She leaned in close enough that the passengers across the aisle could hear every word, and hissed, "That's what people like you eat anyway." She looked at the spoiled food, looked at the blind woman who couldn't see the mold growing on her pasta, and she smiled. She actually smiled. But she didn't see the 9-year-old girl standing 3 feet behind her. She didn't see the phone already recording. And she sure as hell didn't know that the quiet blind woman she had just humiliated owned the entire airline network that paid her salary. What happened next ended her career in 11 minutes flat. If this story gives you chills, I need you to subscribe to my channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Trust me, you do not want to miss a single second of what I'm about to tell you. The woman in seat 2A hadn't flown in 3 years. 3 years since the last time she stepped inside an airport. 3 years since she heard the sound of jet engines and felt her entire body lock up with a grief so heavy it pressed the air out of her lungs. But today, Dr. Nadine Ellison forced herself to walk down the jetway of Flight 1247 from Miami to Baltimore, holding her daughter's arm with one hand and gripping her white cane with the other. "Mama, you're squeezing my arm too hard," Zuri whispered. "Sorry, baby. It's okay. We're almost to our seats. Row 2, left side. 3 more steps." Nadine nodded and tried to breathe. The sounds crashed into her from every direction, the overhead bin slamming shut, the flight attendants greeting passengers with that rehearsed cheerfulness, the cabin pressure already building in her damaged ears. Every single sound reminded her of David, her husband, her co-pilot in life, the man who died on a runway 3 years ago and took her sight with him. "Here we are, Mama. Sit down. I've got your bag." Zuri guided her mother into the wide leather seat of first class and buckled her seatbelt with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been caring for a blind parent since she was 6 years old. She was 9 now. 9 years old, 4 feet 7 inches tall, and carrying a weight on her shoulders that would crush most adults. "Tell me about the cabin," Nadine said softly. This was their ritual. Everywhere they went, Zuri became her mother's eyes. Mostly business people. The man across from us hasn't looked up from his laptop since we sat down. There's a woman behind us reading something thick, looks like a medical journal. And there's a man 3 rows back who looks like he works for an airline. He's got that look, you know, like he's grading everyone. Nadine almost smiled. And the flight attendants? Zuri paused. She looked toward the galley, where a tall blonde woman in her mid-40s was pouring orange juice, with an expression that suggested she'd rather be doing anything else on earth. Zuri watched her hand a glass to the white businessman in row 1 with a warm smile and a, "Here you go, sir." Then she watched the same woman turn toward the black couple in row 3 and set their drinks down without a word, without eye contact, without even slowing her pace. "There's one I don't like," Zuri said quietly. "Baby." I know. Not everyone has to like us. But, Mama, it's not about liking. It's about how she moves. She's different with us. I can see it. Nadine reached for her daughter's hand. As long as she does her job, that's all we can ask for. We're not here to make friends. We're here to get to Baltimore so Dr. Shaw can fix my eyes. Zuri wanted to argue, but she held her tongue. She had learned when to push her mother and when to wait. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. The plane began to taxi. Nadine's fingers dug into the armrest so hard, her knuckles turned gray. The engines spooled up, and the aircraft accelerated down the runway, and Nadine's breath came in short, shallow gasps that she tried to hide from her daughter, but couldn't. "Mama, breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth, like Dr. Patterson taught us." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Your hands are shaking. But that's okay. You're allowed to be scared. We're doing this together." The plane lifted off, and Nadine let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The last time she had heard that sound, that exact pitch of engines at takeoff, she had been standing in the terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson, watching David's inspection flight climb into the sky. 20 minutes later, she watched it come back down in flames. "I'm right here, Mama," Zuri said, her small hand wrapped around her mother's trembling fingers. "I'm not going anywhere." They flew in silence for 20 minutes. Nadine's breathing slowly returned to normal. The seatbelt sign turned off. The cabin settled into the quiet hum of a routine flight. And that was when Karen Whitfield began her service round. Karen had been a flight attendant for 15 years. She had started with enthusiasm and ended up with resentment. Somewhere along the way, the job that was supposed to take her around the world had turned into a uniform she hated wearing and a smile she hated faking. She blamed everyone but herself. She blamed the airline for low pay. She blamed the passengers for being demanding. And she blamed certain passengers, the ones who looked like Nadine and Zuri, for what she called taking up space they didn't earn. She never said it out loud. Not exactly. She was too smart for that. But it lived in every interaction, every micro-expression, every barely perceptible shift in her voice when she addressed black passengers versus white ones. Her colleague Jessica Pratt had noticed it. Other flight attendants had whispered about it, but nobody had ever called her on it directly, not once in 15 years. Today, that streak was about to end. Karen moved through first class with her beverage cart. She reached row 1 and smiled at the white businessman. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Henderson? Another coffee?" "Cream and sugar, right? I remembered from your last flight." "That's very kind of you, Karen. Yes, please." She poured his coffee with care, handed it over with both hands, and moved on. When she reached row 2, she stopped. She looked at Nadine's dark sunglasses. She looked at the white cane folded beside the seat. She looked at Zuri, this small black girl sitting in a first-class seat that cost $4,000. "Drinks?" Karen said. Not, "Can I get you something to drink?" Not, "What would you like?" Just, "Drinks?" One word, flat, dismissive. "Could my mother have a sparkling water with lemon, please?" Zuri said politely. "And I'll have apple juice." Karen didn't write it down. She didn't repeat the order. She walked away without acknowledging the request. 3 minutes later, she came back, set a plain water with no lemon in front of Nadine, set nothing in front of Zuri, and kept walking. "Excuse me," Zuri called after her. "You forgot my apple juice, and my mother asked for sparkling water with lemon." Karen turned around slowly. "We're out of sparkling water. I can see 3 bottles of sparkling water on your cart from here." Karen's jaw tightened. She grabbed a bottle, poured it without the lemon, and set it down hard enough to splash water on Nadine's sleeve. Then she pulled an apple juice from the cart and placed it on Zuri's tray without a word. Nadine felt the cold water on her sleeve and flinched. "What happened?" "Nothing, Mama, just a little spill. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Zuri's heart was hammering, not from fear, but from anger. The kind of anger that 9-year-olds aren't supposed to feel. The kind that comes from watching someone disrespect your mother and knowing that your mother can't even see it happening. She memorized Karen's name tag. Karen Whitfield. She filed it away in her mind, like her mother had taught her to file away information during business calls. Names matter, baby. Names give you power. The flight reached cruising altitude, and the pilot announced that meal service would begin shortly. Nadine had pre-ordered a vegetarian meal because her medications required a strict diet. Any deviation, any contamination, any food-borne illness could compromise her immune system and delay the surgery that she had already postponed for 3 devastating years. "I need to use the restroom," Zuri said. "Will you be okay for a few minutes?" "Go ahead, baby. I'll be right here." Zuri unbuckled her seatbelt and headed toward the lavatory. She was gone for less than 4 minutes. But 4 minutes was all Karen Whitfield needed. The moment Zuri left her seat, Karen appeared with Nadine's meal tray. She placed it on the tray table with a thud. "Your special meal," she said, and the word special came out like something she'd scraped off the bottom of her shoe. "Thank you," Nadine said with a gracious smile. She had spent her entire career being gracious to people who didn't deserve it. It was a survival skill that successful black women learn early and practice daily and hate themselves for needing. Karen walked away without offering to help Nadine locate her utensils, without telling her where the food was positioned on the plate, without asking if there was anything else she needed. She just left a blind woman alone with a meal she couldn't see and walked away. Nadine's fingers found the fork. She oriented the plate by touch, the way her occupational therapist had taught her. She brought the fork toward the food and was about to take her first bite when she heard her daughter's voice, sharp and urgent. "Mama, wait! Don't eat that!" Zuri had come back from the restroom, and the smell hit her before she even reached the row. It was sour. Wrong. The kind of smell that your body recognizes as danger before your brain can even name it. "What is it?" Nadine asked, freezing with the fork halfway to her mouth. Zuri leaned close to the tray. The pasta sauce had a grayish tint that fresh tomato sauce never has. The vegetables were wilted and slimy, and the smell, that unmistakable acidic smell of food that had turned, was strong enough that Zuri had to pull back. "The food is spoiled, Mama. Don't touch it." Nadine set the fork down immediately. She trusted her daughter's eyes the way she had once trusted her own, completely and without question. "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. It smells sour. The vegetables look slimy. This food is bad. If you eat this, you could get sick. Really sick. And the surgery?" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what was at stake. 3 years of waiting, 3 years of darkness, 3 years of grief. All of it riding on Nadine being healthy enough for surgery in 48 hours. Zuri pressed the call button. 30 seconds passed. A minute. 90 seconds. She pressed it again. Karen Whitfield finally appeared, her face already set in an expression of annoyed impatience before she even reached their row. "Yes?" "This food is spoiled," Zuri said calmly. "My mother needs a replacement meal, please." Karen glanced at the tray the way someone glances at a parking ticket. Barely. Dismissively. "The food is fine." "It's not fine. Smell it." "I don't need to smell it. All our meals are prepared according to strict safety guidelines." Nadine spoke up, her voice measured and polite. "I understand that, ma'am, but my daughter has very good instincts and she says the food smells off. Could we please just get a fresh meal? I have a medical procedure in 2 days and I can't risk getting sick." Karen looked at Nadine, really looked at her. At her dark glasses, at her white cane, at her brown skin, at the expensive but understated clothing that suggested money, but not the kind of money Karen associated with first class. And something shifted in Karen's face. Something ugly. Something that had been hiding beneath the surface for 15 years. "Ma'am, I've been serving meals on this airline for 15 years. I know what spoiled food looks like. Maybe you're just not used to this type of cuisine." The words landed like a slap. Maybe you're not used to this type of cuisine. As if a woman who had dined in 5-star restaurants on every continent didn't know what good food smelled like. As if a woman who had built a billion-dollar business was somehow too unsophisticated to understand vegetarian pasta. Zuri's hands balled into fists at her sides. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the kind of anger that makes your vision sharpen and your hearing go crystal clear. "Ma'am, with respect," Zuri said, keeping her voice steady. "My mother has traveled the world and eaten in restaurants you've probably only seen in magazines. She's asking you politely to replace a meal that is clearly spoiled. Please do your job." Karen's eyes went wide, then narrow, then cold. "Little girl, I don't take orders from children. If your mother has a complaint, she can fill out a form when we land." "My mother is blind. She can't fill out a form. And she's asking you right now, face to face, for safe food. That shouldn't require paperwork." The passengers around them had gone quiet. The businessman across the aisle had closed his laptop. The woman behind them had lowered her medical journal. Everyone was listening now. Karen leaned in close, dropping her voice just enough to create the illusion of privacy while ensuring every nearby passenger could still hear. "Look, I understand that some people have different standards about food, but I can assure you this meal is fine. If you don't want to eat it, I can bring some crackers or peanuts, something simple. Some people have different standards. Something simple." The implications hung in the air like smoke from a burning house. This wasn't about food anymore. Everyone in first class knew exactly what Karen was really saying. Nadine closed her eyes behind her dark glasses. Her hands were shaking, not from the turbulence that had just started to rock the aircraft, but from the humiliation of being reduced to this. She was Dr. Nadine Ellison. She had built an empire. She had spoken before Congress about aviation safety. She had been on the cover of Forbes. And here she was, being told to eat crackers because a flight attendant had decided she wasn't worth a fresh plate of pasta. "I'm sorry," Nadine said quietly. "I don't want to cause any trouble." And that was the moment that broke Zuri's heart and lit a fire in her soul simultaneously. Her mother was apologizing for asking not to be poisoned, apologizing for existing in first class, apologizing the way Black women have been taught to apologize for centuries, shrinking themselves to make hostile white people comfortable. No, Zuri thought, not today. She looked at the passengers watching them. She looked at Jessica Pratt standing in the galley doorway with her hand over her mouth. She looked at the man 3 rows back, the one who looked like he worked for an airline, who was now sitting up very straight with an expression of growing horror on his face. And then Zuri looked directly at Karen Whitfield and said, in a voice clear enough to reach every single person in first class, "Did you serve my mother rotten food because she's blind?" The cabin went dead silent. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. Karen's face flushed red. "Excuse me? My mother asked you for a replacement meal because the food is spoiled. You refused. You insulted her. You implied that Black people have different food standards, and now you're offering crackers to a first-class passenger who paid full price for her ticket. So I'm asking you directly, in front of all these witnesses, did you serve my mother spoiled food because she's blind and you thought she wouldn't know?" Karen looked around at the other passengers. Every single one of them was watching. Several had their phones out. She was cornered, and she knew it. And cornered people do one of 2 things. They surrender or they attack. Karen chose to attack. "Little girl, you need to sit down, close your mouth, and let the adults handle this. I don't know what kind of household you were raised in, but in my world, children don't talk to adults like that." "In my world," Zuri replied without missing a beat, "adults don't serve blind women spoiled food and then laugh about it." Karen's nostrils flared. She stepped closer to Zuri, using her height to try to intimidate a child who had watched her mother stare down boardrooms full of hostile executives. "You think you're special because you're in first class? You think this seat makes you somebody? I've seen 1,000 passengers like you. You probably used miles or some diversity program to get here. So sit down, eat what you're given, and be grateful." The gasps were audible. Someone said, "Oh my God," from 3 rows back. The businessman across the aisle was filming openly now, no longer pretending to be discreet. Nadine reached for her daughter's arm. "Zuri, baby, please sit down. Please don't." But Zuri was already past the point of sitting down. Her father had told her mother something once, during a late-night phone call that Zuri had overheard from the hallway. "Sometimes, Nadine, you have to stop being polite and start being heard." "I'm going to ask you one more time," Zuri said, her voice dropping to a tone that was eerily calm, the tone her mother used in negotiations when she was about to close a deal that would make the other side regret everything. "Did you serve my mother this food on purpose?" "That's what people like you eat anyway," Karen said. She said it, right there in front of 30 first-class passengers, 6 of whom were recording video. She said the thing that had been living in her chest for 15 years, the thing she had hidden behind fake smiles and policy excuses and plausible deniability. She said it out loud, and the words hung in the recycled cabin air like a bomb that had just been armed. For 3 full seconds, nobody breathed. Then Zuri nodded. Slowly, the way someone nods when their worst suspicion has been confirmed, when the thing they hoped wasn't true turns out to be exactly what they feared. "You will respect Black people," Zuri said. Karen laughed. It was a nervous laugh, the laugh of someone who has just realized they've made a terrible mistake, but is too proud to admit it. "Or else what? You're fired, and no airline will ever hire you again." The laughter that followed came from Karen and from 2 passengers who thought they were watching a child's fantasy play out in real time, a 9-year-old firing a flight attendant. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was adorable. "Sweetie," Karen said, her voice dripping with the special condescension that adults reserve for children they want to publicly humiliate. "You can't fire me. You're 9. This isn't a movie." Zuri pulled out her phone. Not a toy, an iPhone 15 Pro. She opened her contacts, scrolled to a name, and began typing a message with the speed and accuracy of someone who had been communicating with corporate executives since she was 7 years old. Karen turned to Jessica Pratt in the galley. "Can you believe this? These entitled people think they run the world." But Jessica wasn't laughing. Jessica was staring at Zuri with the expression of someone watching a lit match fall toward gasoline. She had noticed things Karen had missed in her rage. The child's clothes were expensive, but not flashy, the kind of expensive that old money wears. Her phone was the latest model. Her posture was perfect, and she was typing a message to someone with the confidence of a person who had authority backing every keystroke. "Karen," Jessica whispered urgently, "maybe we should get the supervisor." "For what? A bratty kid playing pretend?" Zuri finished typing and looked up. "I sent a message to the appropriate people. You'll be hearing from them shortly." Karen rolled her eyes so hard, her entire head moved. "Oh, I'm sure I will. Did you text your little friend to come save you?" Zuri didn't respond. She simply sat down next to her mother, took her trembling hand, and waited. 3 rows back, Derek Hale's phone had just vibrated with an incoming message that would change the course of his entire career. He read it once. He read it twice. His face lost all its color. He read it a 3rd time, and his hands began to shake so badly he could barely hold the device. The message was from corporate headquarters. It had been forwarded from the office of the CEO. It had originated from Margaret Liu, executive assistant to the board of directors of Ellison Holdings. Derek Hale knew that name. Every single person who worked in regional aviation knew that name. Ellison Holdings controlled the partnership network that his airline depended on for 30% of its revenue. Without Ellison Holdings, his airline would collapse within 6 months. Every route, every hub, every connection that kept them profitable ran through agreements negotiated by one person, Dr. Nadine Ellison. And now Derek was reading a message that informed him, in precise corporate language, that Dr. Nadine Ellison and her daughter were passengers on his flight, that they had been subjected to discriminatory treatment, that the board had been notified, and that all partnership agreements were under immediate review. Derek looked toward seat 2A. He looked at the quiet, blind woman with the dark glasses. He looked at the 9-year-old girl who was holding her mother's hand with the gentle fierceness of a lion cub guarding its pride. And then he looked at Karen Whitfield, who was restocking napkins in the galley, laughing about the entitled brat in 2A, completely and totally unaware that she had just set fire to a billion-dollar business relationship and destroyed not only her own career, but potentially the careers of every single person who worked for this airline. Derek stood up. His legs felt like they were made of water. He walked toward the galley on feet that barely seemed to touch the ground, his phone clutched in a hand that would not stop shaking. "Karen," he said, and something in his voice made her stop laughing immediately. "We need to talk, right now." Karen looked at his face, at his pale skin, at the sweat beading on his forehead, at the way his eyes kept darting toward seat 2A like he was looking at a ticking bomb. "What's wrong with you?" she said. "You look like somebody died." Derek Hale closed his eyes, took a breath, and said the words that would end Karen Whitfield's 15-year career in aviation. "Do you know who that woman is? The one you just humiliated in front of 30 witnesses? The blind woman you served spoiled food to? The mother of the child you racially abused on camera?" Karen shrugged. "Some random passenger with an attitude problem and a bratty kid." "That's Dr. Nadine Ellison. She owns Ellison Holdings. She owns the entire regional network we depend on to exist. And her board of directors just sent me a message saying they are reviewing every single partnership agreement we have with them because of what you did today." The napkins fell from Karen's hands. They scattered across the galley floor like white flags of surrender, which is exactly what they were. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face went from flushed red to bone white in less than 2 seconds. "That's impossible," she whispered. She's the most powerful person on this airplane," Derek said. "And you just told her 9-year-old daughter that spoiled food is what people like you eat anyway, in front of 30 witnesses, on camera. Do you understand what you've done? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Karen grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. The galley seemed to be spinning around her. Everything she had said in the last 30 minutes was replaying in her mind on a loop. Some people have different standards. Maybe you're not used to this type of cuisine. That's what people like you eat anyway. I didn't know, she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't know who she was. Derek stared at her with an expression that contained equal parts fury and disbelief. That's the point, Karen. That's the whole point. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them like a human being. You shouldn't need to Google a passenger's net worth before you decide whether to give them safe food. You should just do your job. That's all you ever had to do. And you couldn't even manage that. Karen's eyes filled with tears. Not tears of remorse, not yet. Tears of fear. The animal terror of someone who has just realized that the ground beneath them has disappeared and there is nothing to grab onto during the fall. What do I do? She whispered. You do nothing. You don't go near that family again. You don't speak to them. You don't look at them. You go to the back of this aircraft and you sit down and you pray that Dr. Nadine Ellison is a more forgiving person than you deserve. Because if she's not, every single person who works for this airline is going to lose their job because of you. Karen's legs buckled. She caught herself on the beverage cart and stood there, swaying, as the full magnitude of what she had done crashed over her like a wave. 15 years of hiding her racism behind policy and procedure and plausible deniability. 15 years of getting away with it. And it had all ended because she couldn't treat a blind woman and her daughter with basic human decency. Derek left her there and walked toward seat 2A. Every step felt like it took a year. When he reached the row, he stopped and looked at Dr. Nadine Ellison, who sat quietly with her daughter's hand in hers, her dark glasses hiding eyes that hadn't seen the world in 3 years. And he looked at Zori, this 9-year-old girl who had just brought down a 15-year veteran with nothing but the truth and a cell phone. Dr. Kingsley. Dr. Ellison, he corrected himself, his voice barely above a whisper but heavy with genuine shame. My name is Derek Hale. I'm the senior flight supervisor for this route. I want to personally apologize for what happened today. There is absolutely no excuse for how you and your daughter were treated. None. Nadine nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Hale. I've been in contact with your board, and I want you to know that this situation is being taken with the utmost seriousness. I will personally ensure that you and Zuri receive proper care for the rest of this flight, starting with a fresh, properly prepared meal for you, right now. It was Zuri who spoke next. She looked up at Derek with those eyes that had already seen too much of the world's ugliness and had decided to fight it anyway. Mr. Hale, my mother hasn't eaten since yesterday because of her pre-surgical fasting schedule. She was supposed to have a proper meal on this flight because she needs nutrition before her procedure. This was the one meal she was counting on before her surgery. The surgery she's waited 3 years for. The surgery to restore her sight. Do you understand what your flight attendant almost took from her today? Derek felt something break inside his chest, not his heart, because that had already shattered about 5 minutes ago. Something deeper. Something that had to do with the kind of man he thought he was versus the kind of man he had just proven himself to be by letting this happen on his watch. I understand, he said, and I promise you, on everything I have, that this will never happen again. Not on my flights, not on any flight. Zuri held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded, the way her mother nodded when she accepted a negotiation term. Formally, precisely, with the understanding that promises are contracts, and contracts have consequences. Good, she said. Then please bring my mother something safe to eat. She's hungry, and she's scared, and she's been through enough today. Derek Hale turned and walked toward the galley, passing Karen Whitfield, who was sitting on the jump seat with mascara running down her face, already beginning to understand that everything she had known about her life was about to change. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He picked up the phone to the flight deck and called the captain. Captain, this is Hale. We have a situation in the cabin, a serious one. I need you to radio ahead to Baltimore and have corporate standing by when we land. And I need access to the premium meal reserves, now. How serious are we talking, the captain asked. Derek looked back towards seat 2A, where a 9-year-old girl was gently wiping tears from her blind mother's face, whispering words of comfort that no child should ever have to say. Career-ending serious, Derek said. Industry-changing serious. The kind of serious that's going to be on the news by tonight. He hung up the phone and began preparing the best meal he could find with his own hands, because right now, feeding a blind woman a proper dinner felt like the only decent thing left to do in a world that had just shown him exactly how ugly it could be. And in seat 2A, Zuri Ellison held her mother's hand and stared out the window at the clouds below, thinking about her father, about what he would have done, about what he would have said. And she heard his voice in her mind, clear as the day he died, saying the words he always said before every flight. Take care of your mama, baby girl. She's stronger than she knows, and so are you. Derek Hale stood over the galley counter with both hands flat against the cold metal surface, trying to stop them from shaking. He had just hung up with the captain. He had just read Margaret Liu's message for the 4th time. And he had just done the math in his head on what was about to happen to this airline, to his career, to every single employee who depended on those Ellison Holdings partnership agreements to keep their paychecks coming. $312 million. That was the annual revenue that flowed through Ellison Holdings' regional network into his airline's operations. $312 million controlled by the blind woman in seat 2A, whose wrist his flight attendant had just grabbed while forcing spoiled food toward her mouth. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Margaret Liu. Mr. Hale, please confirm receipt. The board requires acknowledgement within 5 minutes. He typed back with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. Confirmed. Situation is being handled immediately. The offending crew member has been removed from service. He hit send and looked up. Karen Whitfield was still sitting on the jump seat across the galley, mascara streaked down both cheeks, her hands clenched in her lap so tight the knuckles had turned yellow. She hadn't moved since he told her. She hadn't spoken. She just sat there staring at the floor like a woman watching her own funeral from above. Karen, she didn't look up. Karen, I need you to go to the back of the aircraft. Sit in the last row. Don't speak to any passengers. Don't make eye contact. Don't do anything. Do you understand me? I've been here 15 years, Karen whispered. 15 years and it's over because of one meal? Derek felt something snap inside him. Not sympathy, not patience. Something more dangerous. The cold fury of a man who has just realized that his entire professional life is collapsing because of someone else's hatred. It's not over because of one meal, Karen. It's over because you grabbed a blind woman's hand and tried to force-feed her rotten food. It's over because you told a 9-year-old black girl that spoiled food is what people like her eat. It's over because you did all of this in front of 30 witnesses with cameras. This isn't about one meal. This is about who you are, and who you are just cost this airline everything. Karen flinched like he'd hit her. I didn't know who she was. You keep saying that like it matters. It doesn't matter, Karen. It never mattered. You could have done this to anyone. The fact that you did it to the one person who can bankrupt us is just the universe's way of making sure you can't get away with it this time. Now go to the back of the plane before I have the captain divert this flight and have you removed by law enforcement. Karen stood up on legs that barely held her weight. She took one step, then stopped. Is there any chance? No, Derek said. There's no chance. Go. She walked through the curtain that separated first class from the main cabin. She walked past rows of passengers who didn't know yet what had happened. She walked all the way to the last row of the aircraft and sat down in the middle seat between two strangers and stared straight ahead at the seat back in front of her and felt her entire identity dissolve like sugar in boiling water. 15 years. Gone. Because she couldn't look at a blind black woman and see a human being. Back in the galley, Derek was pulling apart the premium meal reserves with desperate hands. He found a sealed vegetarian entree that had been reserved for the crew. He checked the date. He checked the seal. He opened it and smelled it himself, holding it under his nose for a full 10 seconds, because he was not going to make the same mistake twice. Not today, not ever. He plated the food carefully. He added a fresh salad from the first-class reserves. He found a small bottle of sparkling water and cut a lemon himself with a paring knife from the galley kit. He placed everything on a clean tray with real silverware, not the standard utensils, but the set they kept for the captain's meals. Then he carried it to seat 2A. Zuri saw him coming. She watched him approach with an expression that was neither hostile nor forgiving. It was evaluating, the same expression her mother wore during contract negotiations, the expression of someone deciding whether the person in front of them can be trusted. Dr. Ellison, Derek said softly, I've prepared a fresh meal for you personally. Vegetarian entree, sealed and checked, fresh salad, sparkling water with lemon. I've placed the fork at 12 o'clock, knife at 3 o'clock, water glass at your upper right. Nadine turned her face toward his voice. Behind her dark glasses, tears she had been fighting for the last 20 minutes had dried into salt tracks on her cheeks. You didn't have to do that yourself. Yes, I did. Nadine's fingers found the fork. She hesitated. 3 years of instinct told her not to trust. 3 years of being hurt by a world she could no longer see had taught her that kindness from strangers was usually temporary and conditional. It's safe, Mama, Zuri said quietly. She had already leaned in and checked. The food smelled clean, fresh, like someone had actually cared about what they were serving. You can eat. Nadine took her first bite. Her shoulders dropped 2 inches as the tension began to release from her body. She chewed slowly, carefully, the way someone eats when they've been afraid of food for the last 30 minutes. Then she took a second bite, and a small sound escaped her throat that was half relief and half grief for all the dignity that had been stripped from her in the last hour. Thank you, she said to Derek. Please don't thank me, Dr. Ellison. You should never have to thank someone for doing the bare minimum of their job. What happened today was a failure at every level, and I take full responsibility. You weren't the one who did it. I was the one who was supposed to prevent it. I was 3 rows away. I heard the beginning of the confrontation, and I did nothing because I assumed it was a routine complaint. I should have intervened the moment I heard the tone of voice your daughter was responding to. That's on me. Zuri looked at Derek differently now. Not warmly, not yet, but with something approaching respect. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't minimizing. He was standing in front of them and owning his failure with the kind of honesty that Zuri had learned to recognize as rare. Mr. Hale, Zuri said, how long have you worked for this airline? 22 years. Do you know who my mother is? Derek paused. He could lie. He could pretend he was just being a good supervisor. But this 9-year-old had a way of looking at you that made lying feel like trying to hold water in your fists. It was going to leak out no matter what. I know who she is now. I didn't know when I heard the confrontation. I found out afterward, from the message your board sent. Would you have come over if you didn't get that message? The question hit Derek like a fist to the sternum. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The truth was ugly, but it was the truth, and this child deserved it. I'd like to say yes, but honestly, I don't know. I heard the beginning of the argument, and I chose not to get involved. I assumed it was a difficult passenger and a stressed flight attendant. I made assumptions, and those assumptions meant your mother sat here being humiliated while I sat 3 rows away doing nothing. Zuri nodded. That's the most honest thing anyone on this plane has said to us today. Derek's eyes were burning. He blinked hard and looked away. 22 years in aviation, and he had just been given a lesson in integrity by someone who couldn't ride a roller coaster without a parent's permission. I need to make some calls before we land, he said. Is there anything else either of you need right now? My mother needs to rest, Zuri said. She has surgery in 48 hours, and she's been through enough stress today to last another 3 years. So yes, what we need is for the rest of this flight to be quiet and safe and boring. Can you do that? I can do that. Derek walked away, and Zuri turned to her mother, who had finished half the meal and was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the window she couldn't see through. How are you feeling, Mama? Tired, baby. So tired. Eat a little more. Dr. Shaw said you need nutrition before the procedure. Zuri. Yes? What you did today, standing up to that woman, I'm proud of you. But I'm also scared. People like her, They don't just go away. They come back. They retaliate. And you're 9 years old, baby. You shouldn't have to fight battles like this. Zori took her mother's hand. Daddy fought battles every time he got in a cockpit. You fought battles every time you walked into a boardroom. Somebody had to fight this one. And I was the only one standing up. Nadine's chin trembled. Your father would have... Daddy would have done exactly what I did, except he probably would have been louder. A sound came out of Nadine that was so unexpected, it startled them both. She laughed. A real, genuine, broken laugh that carried 3 years of grief and about 15 minutes of relief, all tangled together. She laughed, and then she cried, and then she laughed again, and Zuri held her hand through all of it, because that's what you do when you're 9 years old, and your mother is the strongest person you've ever known, and also the most fragile. Across the aisle, Captain James Porter had been watching. He was deadheading back to Atlanta in civilian clothes. But he was still a pilot. He was still a black man who had spent 30 years in an industry that didn't always want him there. And he had just watched a child do something that most adults in his profession never had the courage to do. He unbuckled his seatbelt and walked over to row 2. He knelt down beside Nadine's chair, slowly, respectfully, the way you approach someone who has been wounded. Dr. Ellison, my name is James Porter. I'm a captain with Delta Airlines. Nadine turned toward his voice. Captain Porter, ma'am, I knew your husband. Not well, but we crossed paths at a few conferences. He spoke at an OBAP event in Dallas about 8 years ago, Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals. His speech about safety innovation was the best presentation I've ever heard in my career. Nadine's breath caught. Nobody talked about David anymore. Not to her face. People avoided the subject like his name was something dangerous, something that might detonate if spoken aloud. Hearing a stranger say his name with respect and admiration felt like oxygen after drowning. He would talk about that speech for weeks after, Nadine said, her voice thick. He rehearsed it in our kitchen. Zori was 4, and she sat on the counter eating cereal and told him he was talking too fast. Captain Porter smiled. She was right. He did talk fast. But every word mattered. He paused, choosing his next words with the care of a man who understood their weight. Dr. Ellison, your husband's safety innovations are still standard protocol on most regional carriers. He saved lives he never got to know about. And today, your daughter showed the same kind of courage he had, the kind that doesn't care about consequences because the principle matters more. Zuri listened to this stranger talk about her father and felt something crack open in her chest that she had been holding shut for 3 years. She didn't cry. She wouldn't cry in front of people she didn't know. But she memorized every word Captain Porter said because she was going to write them down later in the notebook she kept under her bed. The notebook she had titled Things People Say About Daddy that she had been filling since the funeral. Thank you, Captain Porter, Zuri said. That means a lot. He looked at her. How old are you? 9. When I was 9, I was scared to order my own food at McDonald's. You just stood up to a grown woman committing a federal civil rights violation and reported her to a corporate board. What are you going to be when you grow up? I'm going to help my mother run our airline. And then I'm going to make it the best airline in the country. One where what happened today doesn't happen to anyone, ever. Captain Porter stood up. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a business card, and placed it in Zuri's hand. When you're ready to start hiring pilots, call me. I want to work for you. He walked back to his seat, and Zuri looked at the business card. Captain James R. Porter, Delta Airlines, 30 years of service. She put it in her pocket next to her phone and felt something shift inside her. Not anger anymore. Something bigger. Something that felt like purpose. The next 40 minutes of the flight passed in relative quiet. Nadine ate, rested, and eventually fell into a light sleep with her head against the window. Zuri stayed awake, watching the cabin, watching the galley, watching everything, the way she had learned to watch everything since her mother lost her sight. Jessica Pratt, Karen's colleague, approached the row twice. The first time, she brought fresh water without being asked. The second time, she brought a warm blanket for Nadine and placed it gently over her sleeping form. Both times, she looked at Zuri with an expression that was equal parts apology and something else, something that looked like shame for not intervening sooner. "I'm sorry," Jessica said quietly on her second visit. "I should have said something when I saw how Karen was treating you. I knew it was wrong, and I stayed quiet." Zori looked at her for a long time. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because she's been here longer than me. Because I didn't want to cause problems. Because it's easier to look the other way." Jessica's voice cracked. "Those are terrible reasons, and I know it." "Yes," Zori said simply, "they are." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, accepting the judgment of a 9-year-old because she knew she deserved it, and walked away. Dr. Angela Morris, the trauma surgeon in seat 4B, had been documenting everything in a small leather notebook since the confrontation began. She was a meticulous woman by profession. She documented injuries, treatments, outcomes. Today, she was documenting something different. She was writing down every word she had heard Karen Whitfield say, every action she had witnessed, every timestamp she could remember. Not because anyone had asked her to, but because she was a Black woman who had learned from experience that when incidents like this went to court, memories faded and witnesses disappeared. She tore the pages from her notebook, walked to row 2, and handed them to Zuri. "I'm Dr. Angela Morris. I'm a trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins, which I believe is where your mother is headed for her procedure." Zuri took the pages. "You wrote everything down?" "Every word. Time-stamped. I'll also provide a formal statement to whoever conducts the investigation. And if your mother needs any medical support before or after her surgery, here's my direct number." She placed her card on Nadine's tray table. "This isn't just about what happened on this flight. This is about making sure there's a record that can't be erased or rewritten." Zuri looked at the handwritten pages. Precise, detailed, damning. She folded them carefully and put them in her bag next to the notebook she used to track her mother's medical appointments. "Dr. Morris, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "My mother's surgery, is it dangerous?" Dr. Morris paused. She could hear the child beneath the composure. The scared little girl who had been acting like a CEO for the last hour, but who was really just a kid terrified of losing the only parent she had left. "Corneal repair surgery is generally safe. The success rates are very high, especially at Hopkins. But every surgery carries risk, and stress can complicate recovery. Which is why what happened today is not just a customer service issue. The stress your mother experienced could genuinely impact her surgical outcome." Zuri's jaw tightened. "So that woman didn't just humiliate my mother. She may have put her surgery at risk." "I'm saying that stress affects the body in ways we can measure. Elevated cortisol, increased blood pressure, compromised immune response. Your mother needs to be as calm and healthy as possible going into that procedure. Today did not help." Zuri absorbed this the way she absorbed everything, completely, immediately, filing it away not as a child processing information, but as someone building a case. "Thank you, Dr. Morris. I won't forget this." "I don't think you forget anything, Zuri." The pilot announced their descent into Baltimore Washington International Airport. The seatbelt sign illuminated. Passengers began putting away their devices and straightening their seats. And Derek Hale walked to the intercom panel, picked up the handset, and took a breath that felt like it lasted a full minute. He had thought about this for the last 40 minutes. He had drafted it in his head, rewritten it, torn it up mentally, and started over. He knew that what he was about to say would be recorded. He knew it would be shared. He knew it would probably end up on the news. He said it anyway. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, I want to take a moment to address something that happened during this flight. Earlier today, one of our passengers was treated with profound disrespect and racial discrimination by a member of our crew. A blind woman traveling for medical treatment was served compromised food, and when she raised a legitimate safety concern, she was met with hostility, contempt, and language that has no place on this aircraft or anywhere in civilized society." He paused. The cabin was completely silent. Her 9-year-old daughter stood up and demanded the basic human dignity that every passenger deserves. She showed more courage, more professionalism, and more moral clarity than any adult on this flight, including me. I was 3 rows away. "I heard the confrontation begin, and I did nothing until it was too late. That failure is mine, and I own it." Another pause. His voice was shaking now, but he pushed through. "I want to be clear about something. The behavior you witnessed today does not represent our airline's values. But more importantly, I don't want to hide behind that statement, because the truth is, these incidents don't happen in a vacuum. They happen because people like me stay quiet when we should speak up. They happen because we make assumptions about who belongs in first class and who doesn't. They happen because we allow small acts of disrespect to pass unchallenged until they become big ones. He looked toward row 2. Nadine was awake now, listening. Zuri had her hand on her mother's arm. To the young lady who stood up for her mother today, I want you to know that your courage changed something in me. I've been in aviation for 22 years, and I thought I understood service. Today, you taught me what it actually means. Thank you. The cabin erupted in applause. Sustained. Genuine, the kind of applause that comes not from politeness, but from people who have just witnessed something that shifted their understanding of the world. Nadine reached for Zuri's hand and squeezed it hard. Tears were streaming down her face again, but these were different tears. Not humiliation, not fear. Something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Something that felt terrifyingly close to hope. The plane touched down at BWI at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Zuri's phone buzzed with a message from Margaret Liu. Zuri, the board has convened an emergency session. Legal team has been retained. The investigation will begin immediately upon your mother's arrival in Baltimore. A car is waiting at the gate to take you directly to Johns Hopkins. Dr. Shaw's team is standing by. Please tell your mother that everyone at Ellison Holdings is thinking of her tonight. Zuri read the message twice. Then she put her phone away and leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. And for 30 seconds, she let herself be 9 years old. Just 9. Not a CEO's daughter, not a corporate messenger, not a civil rights hero. Just a tired little girl who missed her daddy and wanted her mama to see again. Mama? Yes, baby? When you can see again, what's the first thing you want to look at? Nadine smiled. The first real smile Zuri had felt against her forehead in 3 years. You, baby. The first thing I want to see is you. The seatbelt sign turned off with a chime that sounded, just for a moment, like the beginning of something instead of the end. The car was waiting exactly where Margaret Liu said it would be, gate B7. A black sedan with tinted windows and a driver holding a sign that read Ellison in small, discreet letters. Zuri guided her mother through the jetway, past the gate agents who didn't know yet, past the passengers streaming toward baggage claim, past the airport noise that was already making Nadine's hands tremble again. Almost there, Mama. 12 more steps. The driver is right ahead. Zuri, slow down. My legs feel like they're made of sand. Zuri slowed. She matched her mother's pace, step for step, the way she had been doing for 3 years, becoming the rhythm that kept Nadine moving when Nadine's own body wanted to stop. The driver opened the rear door. Dr. Ellison, my name is Raymond. Margaret Liu sent me. I'll have you at Hopkins in 22 minutes. Nadine settled into the back seat and leaned her head back against the leather. Her breathing was shallow. Too shallow. Zuri noticed immediately. Mama, you're doing that thing again. The short breaths. I'm fine. You're not fine. Your hands are cold and your breathing is off. What's wrong? Nadine was quiet for a long time. The car pulled away from the curb and merged onto the airport exit road before she answered. I keep hearing her voice, Zuri. That woman's voice. That's what people like you eat. I keep hearing it over and over, and I can't make it stop. Zuri felt her chest tighten. She'd been so focused on fighting, on protecting, on being strong, that she hadn't stopped to think about what those words were doing inside her mother's body. Not just her mind, her body. Dr. Morris had warned her, stress affects the body in ways we can measure. Mama, listen to me. That woman is nobody. She is sitting in the back of that airplane right now with no job, no future, and no power. She can't touch you. She can't hurt you. And in 48 hours, you're going to open your eyes and see my face for the first time in 3 years. That's what matters. Not her ugly words. You and me and Dr. Shaw and getting your eyes back. Nadine reached blindly for her daughter and pulled her close. When did you become the parent? About 3 years ago, Mama. Somebody had to. The silence that followed that sentence was heavier than anything Karen Whitfield had ever said. Raymond pulled up to the Johns Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute at 4:09 p.m. Dr. Catherine Shaw was standing at the entrance with 2 members of her surgical team and a nurse holding a wheelchair that Nadine would refuse to sit in 3 times before finally accepting. "Nadine," Dr. Shaw said, taking both of her patient's hands, "how was the flight?" Zuri and Nadine exchanged a look that only they could feel. The kind of wordless communication that develops between a blind mother and the daughter who became her eyes. "Eventful," Nadine said. Dr. Shaw studied her patient's face. She had known Nadine Ellison for 4 years. She had watched this woman postpone surgery again and again, always finding a reason to wait, always hiding behind logistics, when the truth was that she was terrified. And now, standing in front of her, Dr. Shaw could see the signs of acute stress written across every line of Nadine's body. The tension in her jaw, the pallor beneath her brown skin, the way her pulse was visible in her neck, beating too fast. "Nadine, your heart rate is elevated. What happened?" "Can we talk about it inside?" "We can talk about it right now. If something happened that's affecting your stress levels, I need to know before we proceed with pre-surgical evaluations. This surgery requires your body to be in optimal condition." Zuri stepped forward. "Dr. Shaw, a flight attendant served my mother spoiled food, refused to replace it, made racist comments, and physically forced her hand toward the plate. My mother had a panic attack at cruising altitude. Her hands were shaking for over 20 minutes. She didn't eat for the first 2 hours of the flight." Dr. Shaw's expression changed. The warm professionalism dropped away, and what replaced it was the cold focus of a surgeon who had just been told her 3-year surgical plan was in jeopardy. "Define physically forced." She grabbed my mother's wrist and pushed her hand, holding the fork, toward the spoiled food. Multiple passengers witnessed it. It's on video. Dr. Shaw looked at her team. "Get her into exam room 3 immediately. Full vitals, cortisol panel, CBC, CMP. I want a stress echocardiogram scheduled within the hour. Move." The team moved. Nadine was guided into a wheelchair over her protests and pushed through the automatic doors at a pace that said this was no longer a routine pre-op visit. This was triage. "Zuri," Nadine called out as they wheeled her away. "Stay close." "I'm right behind you, Mama. I'm not going anywhere." At 4:31 p.m., Dr. Shaw stood in front of the vitals monitor and did not like what she saw. Blood pressure 158/97, heart rate 104, cortisol levels that wouldn't come back for another hour, but that she already knew would be elevated based on everything else she was seeing. "Nadine, I need you to be completely honest with me. On a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed do you feel right now?" 8. "That's too high. We cannot perform surgery with these numbers. Your blood pressure alone is a contraindication. If these levels don't come down significantly in the next 48 hours, I will have to postpone." The word postpone hit the room like a gunshot. Zuri, who had been sitting quietly in the corner holding her mother's bag, stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. "No, you can't postpone. We've been waiting 3 years. You said the window was closing. You said if we didn't do it now—" "Zuri, doctor." Shaw turned to her with the gentle firmness of someone who had delivered hard news thousands of times. "I understand what's at stake. I have been fighting for this surgery for 3 years alongside your mother, but I will not put her on that table if her body isn't ready. Operating under these stress levels increases the risk of complications, including rejection of the corneal graft. If that happens, there is no second chance. The window doesn't just close, it disappears forever." Zuri's composure, the composure that had held through Karen's abuse, through Derek's apology, through the entire flight from hell, cracked. Her lower lip trembled, her eyes filled with water that she refused to let fall. She stood there in that exam room, and for the first time all day, she looked exactly like what she was, a 9-year-old girl who was terrified of losing her mother's last chance to see. So that woman, Karen Whitfield, she didn't just humiliate my mother. She might have stolen her eyesight permanently. Dr. Shaw didn't answer immediately because the honest answer was yes, and she was trying to find a way to say it that wouldn't destroy this child. "I'm saying we need to get these numbers down, and we have 48 hours to do it. So right now, the most important thing in the world is that your mother rests, eats well, stays calm, and doesn't experience any additional stress. Zuri wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. One quick swipe. Then the composure was back. The CEO's daughter. The little girl who had learned that crying doesn't solve problems, but planning does. What do you need from me? I need you to help your mother relax. No phone calls about the incident. No updates from the investigation. No news, no social media, no anything that will remind her of what happened today. For the next 48 hours, her world needs to be small and quiet and safe. Can you do that? I can do that. Good. Doctor. Shaw squeezed Zuri's shoulder. You've been incredibly brave today, but right now, the bravest thing you can do is let your mother rest. Can you be brave enough to stop fighting for a little while? Zuri looked at her mother, who had fallen asleep on the exam table with an IV drip in her arm and monitors beeping softly around her. She looked small, smaller than Zuri had ever seen her. The woman who built an empire. The woman who once filled entire conference rooms with her presence. She looked like a patient, just a patient. I can stop fighting, Zuri whispered, but I'm not going to stop protecting her. She sat down next to her mother's bed, pulled out her phone, and sent one final message to Margaret Liu before powering the device off for the next 2 days. Margaret, the flight attendant's actions have put my mother's surgery at risk. Dr. Shaw says the stress may force a postponement. Please inform the board that this is no longer just a discrimination case. This is a medical harm case, and please make sure the investigation includes that detail. The woman didn't just insult us. She may have blinded my mother permanently. She hit send. Then she turned the phone off, placed it in her bag, and took her mother's sleeping hand. I'm right here, Mama. Close your eyes. I'll watch the world for both of us. At that exact moment, 1,100 miles away in Atlanta, the world was doing the opposite of staying quiet. The first video hit Twitter at 3:52 p.m. Eastern, uploaded by the businessman from seat 1A, whose name turned out to be Robert Chen, a venture capitalist with 340,000 followers. His caption was 3 words: "Watch this now." The video was 47 seconds long. It showed Karen Whitfield leaning over Nadine's seat, grabbing her wrist and pushing the fork toward the plate. The audio was clear enough to hear every word. That's what people like you eat anyway. Then it showed Zuri stepping forward with the calm of a general walking onto a battlefield. Take your hands off my mother. By 4:15 p.m., the video had 200,000 views. By 4:45 p.m., it had crossed 2 million. By 5:30 p.m., every major news outlet in the country had picked it up. CNN ran it as breaking news with the banner, "Flight attendant accused of racial abuse and assault on blind passenger." Fox News covered it. MSNBC covered it. It was the lead story on the evening news for ABC, CBS, and NBC. The hashtags appeared within the first hour. Hashtag Justice for Nadine. Hashtag Respect Black Passengers. Hashtag Zuri Ellison. Hashtag Fire Karen Whitfield. But the hashtag that would eventually become a national movement, the one that Zuri herself would adopt as the name of her foundation years later, was the simplest one of all. Hashtag Respect is not optional. Karen Whitfield's name was public by 5 p.m. Her employment history was public by 5:30. Her social media accounts, which she had neglected to make private, were discovered by 6 p.m., and the contents were exactly what everyone expected. Posts questioning affirmative action, comments dismissing Black Lives Matter, a shared article from 2019 about entitlement culture in first class. The internet didn't just find Karen Whitfield, it excavated her. At 6:47 p.m., Karen's airline held an emergency press conference. The CEO, a man named Richard Graves, who had built his career on avoiding controversy, stood behind a podium and read a statement that had clearly been written by lawyers in the last 90 minutes. We are aware of an incident that occurred on Flight 1247 today involving one of our flight attendants and a passenger. The employee in question has been terminated effective immediately. We do not tolerate discrimination of any kind, and we are cooperating fully with all investigations. We have reached out to the affected passenger and her family to offer our deepest apologies. A reporter from the Washington Post asked the first question. Mr. Graves, are you aware that the passenger in question is Dr. Nadine Ellison, the founder and majority shareholder of Ellison Holdings, which controls partnership agreements worth over $300 million annually to your airline? Richard Graves aged 10 years in 2 seconds. Our response would be the same, regardless of the passenger's identity. But you didn't know, did you? You didn't know until after the video went viral. The identity of the passenger is not relevant to our commitment to anti-discrimination policies. Mr. Graves, Ellison Holdings released a statement 20 minutes ago saying they are reviewing all partnership agreements with your airline. Can you comment on the financial impact? Richard Graves looked at his communications director. His communications director looked at the floor. We are confident that our partnership with Ellison Holdings will continue. We have a strong relationship built on mutual respect. Mutual respect? Your flight attendant physically forced spoiled food toward a blind woman and told her 9-year-old daughter that it was what people like her eat. Is that your definition of mutual respect? The press conference lasted 11 minutes. It was a disaster. By the time Richard Graves left the podium, his airline stock had dropped 4% in after-hours trading. 4% doesn't sound like much until you calculate that 4% of a $2 billion market cap is $80 million. Karen Whitfield's racism had just cost her former employer $80 million in a single evening. But the story wasn't done unfolding, because at 7:15 p.m., Maria Santos uploaded her own video. Maria was the off-duty flight attendant from another airline who had been sitting in seat 5A. Her video was different from Robert Chen's. It was longer, nearly 3 minutes, and it captured something the other videos had missed. It captured the moment Derek Hale made his announcement over the intercom. It captured the applause. And it captured something else. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, it showed Karen Whitfield sitting in the last row of the aircraft with her head in her hands, while 30 passengers applauded the 9-year-old girl who had ended her career. That image, Karen alone and broken, while the world celebrated Zuri's courage, became the defining photograph of the entire incident. It was on the front page of the New York Times the next morning. It was shared 40 million times in the first week. It became a symbol that was larger than one racist flight attendant on one flight. It became a symbol of what happens when people in positions of power abuse the vulnerable, and the vulnerable fight back. At 8:30 p.m., Zuri was asleep in a chair next to her mother's hospital bed at Johns Hopkins. Her phone was off. She didn't know about the videos. She didn't know about the press conference. She didn't know that her name was being spoken by millions of people across the country. She was just a tired little girl who had fought the hardest battle of her life and now needed to sleep. But Nadine was awake. She couldn't see the monitors. She couldn't see the IV in her arm. She couldn't see her daughter's face, slack with exhaustion, tilted at an angle that was going to give her a terrible neck ache in the morning. But she could hear. And what she heard was the soft, steady breathing of the only person in the world who mattered to her. "David," Nadine whispered into the dark room, speaking to her dead husband the way she had done every night for 3 years. "You should have seen her today, our baby girl. She looked that woman in the eye and she didn't flinch, not once. She was you, David. She was you on your best day." She reached across the gap between the bed and the chair and found Zuri's hand. She held it gently, careful not to wake her. "I've been hiding, David. You know that. I've been hiding for 3 years because I couldn't face the world without you. I let other people run our company. I let other people make decisions. I let other people fight the fights that you and I used to fight together. And today, our 9-year-old daughter had to stand up and fight because I was too broken to do it myself." Her voice cracked. "She shouldn't have had to do that. She's 9, David. She should be worrying about homework and soccer practice and which Taylor Swift song is her favorite. Instead, she's carrying me. She's been carrying me since the day you died, and I've been letting her because I was too lost in my own grief to see what it was costing her." Nadine's free hand found her own face. She touched the scars around her eyes that the darkness hid from the world. She traced the damage that connected her to David forever, the shrapnel wounds from the explosion that killed him and blinded her on the same terrible night. The surgery is in 2 days. If it works, the first face I see will be hers. And David, I need to see her. Not because I miss seeing the world, because I need to look in her eyes and tell her that she doesn't have to carry me anymore, that I'm back, that her mama is back. She paused. The monitors beeped steadily. Zuri's breathing remained slow and even. But the doctor said my stress levels might be too high. That woman on the plane, Karen, she scared me, David. Not because of what she said. I've heard those words before. You know I have. We both have. But because she said them in front of Zuri. Because our daughter had to hear a grown woman say, "That's what people like you eat." And instead of being protected from that ugliness, she had to be the one to fight it. Nadine's tears fell silently. They rolled from behind closed eyelids that hadn't worked properly in 3 years and dropped onto the hospital pillow. I promise you, David, if I can see again, I will never hide again. I will go back to our airline. I will go back to our boardroom. I will sit in that chair you built for me, and I will finish what we started together. And I will make sure that no one, no flight attendant, no executive, no one ever treats another family the way we were treated today. She squeezed Zuri's hand one more time, and I'll make sure our daughter gets to be a kid again, even if it's the hardest thing I've ever done. At 11:58 p.m., Dr. Shaw checked Nadine's vitals remotely from her office across the hospital campus. Blood pressure, 142/89. Heart rate, 88. Both still elevated, but trending in the right direction. She entered a note in the chart. Patient resting. Stress indicators declining, but still above optimal surgical thresholds. Continue monitoring. Decision on surgical timing to be made at 48-hour mark. Note, patient's daughter sleeping in room. Do not disturb either of them. She closed the chart and sat back in her chair. In 26 years of performing corneal surgery, she had never had a case where a flight attendant's racism might determine whether a patient regained her sight. But here she was, and in 48 hours, she would either give Nadine Ellison back her eyes or tell her that hate had won again. Doctor? Shaw picked up her phone. She had 17 missed calls from reporters. She deleted every single notification, turned the phone face down on her desk, and went back to reviewing Nadine's surgical plan for the 100th time. Because if this surgery happened, it was going to be perfect. She would accept nothing less. 47 hours and counting. 46 hours before the surgery, Zuri woke up with her neck bent at an angle that sent pain shooting down her left shoulder. She blinked, confused for a moment, then remembered where she was. Hospital room, Johns Hopkins, her mother's hand still in hers. She looked at Nadine, still sleeping. The monitors showed numbers Zuri had learned to read over the past 3 years, because when your mother is blind and sick and grieving, you learn everything. Heart rate, 82. Blood pressure, 138/86. Better than yesterday. Not good enough. Good morning, Zuri. A nurse named Patricia had come in silently. Your mother's numbers improved overnight. Dr. Shaw will be in at 7 for rounds. What does she need to be at for the surgery to happen? Patricia hesitated. She wasn't supposed to discuss surgical thresholds with a minor, but this minor had been managing her mother's medical care for 3 years and knew more about corneal repair protocols than most medical students. Blood pressure needs to be below 130/80, heart rate below 75, and the cortisol panel needs to come back within normal range. She's not there yet. No, but she's trending the right direction. The best thing for her right now is rest and zero stress. Zuri nodded. 0 stress. She could do that. She had been doing that for 3 years, building a wall around her mother made of silence and calm and controlled information, keeping the world out so Nadine could survive inside. But today, that wall was going to be tested. At 7:14 a.m., Dr. Shaw arrived, and Nadine woke to the sound of her doctor's footsteps. She knew those footsteps. 4 years of appointments had taught her to recognize Dr. Shaw's brisk, purposeful stride, the way she used to recognize David's boots on the porch. Good morning, Nadine. How did you sleep? Better than I expected. Your numbers are improving. Blood pressure is down. Heart rate is coming closer. But I'm not going to lie to you. We're still above where I need you to be for surgery tomorrow morning. The cortisol results won't be back until noon. If those are elevated, We may need to have a difficult conversation." Nadine's fingers tightened on the bedsheet. "Catherine, I can't wait any longer. You told me yourself the window is closing. If we don't do this now—" "I know what I said, and I stand by it. But I will not risk a failed graft because we rushed. A failed graft means permanent blindness, Nadine. No second chances. No do-overs. I would rather postpone for 2 weeks and succeed than operate tomorrow and fail." 2 weeks. Nadine's voice was flat. "Do I have 2 weeks?" Dr. Shaw was quiet for too long. Zuri felt the silence like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. "I don't know," Dr. Shaw said finally. "The degeneration is progressive. 2 weeks ago, your numbers were better. 2 weeks from now, they may be worse. The honest answer is that tomorrow morning is your best window. Which is why we need to get your stress levels down today. Not tomorrow morning, today." "Tell me what to do." "Nothing. That's the prescription. Do nothing. Think nothing. Worry about nothing. Let Zuri and me handle everything else. Your only job for the next 36 hours is to breathe, eat, sleep, and let your body calm down." Nadine nodded, but Zuri could see her mother's jaw clenching, the way it always did when Nadine was trying to control something internal that refused to be controlled. 3 years of grief and yesterday's trauma were not things you could switch off like a light. At 9 a.m., Zuri left the room to get breakfast from the hospital cafeteria. She'd been gone for less than 3 minutes when her phone, which she had turned back on only to check for messages from Margaret Liu, exploded with notifications. 47 missed calls, 312 text messages, over 1,000 email notifications. She opened one text from Margaret Liu that had been sent at 6 a.m. "Zuri, the videos have gone viral. Over 80 million views combined across all platforms. Every news network is requesting interviews with you and your mother. The airline's stock dropped 6% overnight. Richard Graves has resigned as CEO effective immediately. The FAA has opened a formal investigation into food safety protocols on Flight 1247. The NAACP has issued a statement in support of your family. Congressman Davis from Georgia is calling for congressional hearings on racial discrimination in aviation. Please call me as soon as possible. The board needs guidance on how to proceed publicly." Zuri stood in the middle of the hospital cafeteria holding a tray with scrambled eggs and orange juice and read the message 3 times. Richard Graves resigned. The CEO of an airline resigned because of what Karen Whitfield did to her mother. The FAA was investigating. Congress was getting involved. 80 million people had watched the worst moment of her mother's life. Her hands started to shake. Not from anger, from the weight of it, the sheer, crushing weight of what she had set in motion with one text message on an airplane. She was 9 years old. She had sent a message to Margaret Liu to protect her mother. And now CEOs were resigning, and stock prices were crashing, and Congress was holding hearings, and 80 million strangers had watched her mother's hand being forced toward rotten food. She put the tray down. She walked to a quiet corner near the vending machines. She dialed Margaret Liu's number. "Zuri, thank God. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. My mother doesn't know any of this, and she can't know. Not until after the surgery. Dr. Shaw said 0 stress. If my mother finds out that 80 million people watched that video, her blood pressure will spike and the surgery gets canceled, and she stays blind. Do you understand me?" "I understand. But Zuri, the board needs to respond publicly. Ellison Holdings can't stay silent while this story dominates every news cycle. The partnership question is being asked by every financial analyst in the country. Our stock is actually up because investors see us as having leverage, but the airline stock is in freefall, and they're begging for a statement from us. Then issue a statement. Say Ellison Holdings is aware of the incident, that the family requests privacy during a medical procedure, and that all partnership decisions will be reviewed after Dr. Ellison has recovered. Don't mention me. Don't mention the surgery. Don't give them anything personal." "Zuri, there are reporters outside the hospital." Zuri closed her eyes. "How many?" "At least 30. 2 satellite trucks. CNN has a crew set up across the street." Call hospital security. Have them enforce a media blackout on our floor. No cameras, no reporters, no visitors without my approval. Contact Dr. Shaw's office and make sure her team knows that any staff member who leaks information about my mother's condition will face legal action. And Margaret? Yes? Find out where Karen Whitfield is right now. I want to know if she's talked to any media. She hasn't. Her attorney issued a statement at 11 last night saying his client is deeply sorry and asking for privacy. Deeply sorry. Zuri repeated the words with the flat tone of someone who knew exactly what they meant. They meant Karen Whitfield's lawyer was terrified of the civil lawsuit that was coming and was trying to build a sympathy narrative before it arrived. Zuri, there's one more thing, and I need you to hear this. What? Karen Whitfield's attorney sent a letter to our legal team this morning. She wants to apologize, in person, to your mother. The cafeteria noise seemed to disappear. Zuri stood perfectly still, holding the phone against her ear, and felt something cold and electric run down her spine. She wants to apologize. Yes, her attorney is framing it as a sincere gesture of remorse. Our legal team thinks it's a strategic move to reduce damages in the inevitable lawsuit. But I wanted you to know before making any decisions. No. No. No, she does not get to come here. She does not get to stand in front of my mother and perform an apology for her lawyers. She does not get to use my mother's forgiveness to save herself. Not today. Not while my mother is lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her eyesight because of what that woman did. Tell her attorney that any communication with our family goes through Ellison Holdings' legal department. Period. Margaret Liu was quiet for a moment. Zuri, I've worked for your mother for 12 years. I watched her build this company from a single plane. And right now, talking to you, I feel like I'm talking to her. You're not talking to her. You're talking to me. And I need you to keep talking to me until my mother can talk for herself. Can you do that? Yes, I can do that. Good. I'll check in at noon after the cortisol results come back. Until then, hold the line. Zuri hung up. She picked up the breakfast tray. She walked back to her mother's room. She set the food down on the bedside table and sat in her chair. And when Nadine asked, "Everything okay, baby?" Zuri smiled and said, "Everything's fine, Mama. I got you scrambled eggs. Fork is at 12 o'clock. At 12:17 p.m., Dr. Shaw walked into the room with the cortisol results and an expression that Zuri couldn't read. That scared her more than any bad news would have, because Dr. Shaw was not a woman who hid her emotions. If the results were good, she would look relieved. If the results were bad, she would look serious. But this expression was neither. It was something Zuri had never seen on her face before. It was uncertainty. "Nadine, I have your cortisol results. And? They're borderline, not where I want them, but not in the danger zone either. Your morning levels were elevated, but your afternoon draw shows improvement. The trend is positive." What does borderline mean for the surgery? Dr. Shaw pulled up a chair and sat down. She didn't stand over her patient for this conversation. She sat at eye level, the way someone sits when they're about to have the kind of conversation that changes lives. "It means I have a decision to make. I can postpone and wait for better numbers, knowing that every day we wait, the corneal degeneration progresses. Or I can operate tomorrow morning with numbers that are acceptable but not ideal, knowing that the elevated stress hormones increase the risk of graft rejection by approximately 8 to 12%. 8 to 12%? Yes. So there's an 88 to 92% chance of success even with these numbers. That's correct. Then do the surgery. Nadine, I need you to understand what that 8 to 12% means. If the graft rejects, we cannot try again. The corneal tissue is a one-time match. Rejection means permanent, irreversible blindness. There is no plan B. Nadine turned her face toward where she knew her daughter was sitting. "Zuri, I'm here, Mama. What do you think?" The weight of that question nearly crushed her. Her mother, the woman who built a billion-dollar airline, the woman who had once made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of passengers, was asking her 9-year-old daughter whether she should risk permanent blindness. Zuri thought about her father. She thought about what David Ellison would say if he were sitting in this room right now. She thought about the way he used to talk about flying, about how every flight was a calculated risk, about how pilots don't wait for perfect conditions, because perfect conditions don't exist. They assess the risk, they prepare for the worst, and they fly. Daddy used to say that the most dangerous thing a pilot can do is stay on the ground when the weather is good enough to fly. He said waiting for perfect conditions is how you miss every window God gives you. Nadine's breath shuddered. He did say that. Your numbers are good enough, Mama. Not perfect, good enough. And Dr. Shaw is the best surgeon in the country. If anyone can make this work, she can. I say we fly. Dr. Shaw looked at this child quoting her dead father's aviation philosophy to make a surgical decision, and felt something in her throat that she had to swallow twice before she could speak. Nadine, if you consent, we operate tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'll need you to sign the consent forms tonight, and I need you to understand that you are making this decision with full knowledge of the risks. I understand the risks. I've been blind for 3 years, Catherine. I've lived in the dark since the night my husband died. I've missed seeing my daughter grow from 6 to 9. I missed her first day at her new school. I missed her face when she stood up to that woman on the plane yesterday. I am not spending one more day in the dark if there is any chance at all, of seeing my baby's face again. Then we operate at 6 a.m. We operate at 6 a.m. Zori reached for her mother's hand. She held it the way she had been holding it for 3 years, gently but firmly, the way you hold something precious that you refuse to let the world break. At 3 p.m., while Nadine rested, Zori stepped into the hallway and called Margaret Liu for the second time that day. The surgery is happening tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Thank God. Zori, there have been developments. The FAA investigation has been fast-tracked. They pulled the food logs from Flight 1247 and found that the vegetarian meal served to your mother had been loaded onto the aircraft 14 hours before departure and was stored at an improper temperature for at least 8 of those hours. It wasn't just spoiled by accident. It was a systematic food safety violation. Are you saying the food was bad before Karen even served it? Yes, but Karen would have known. Flight attendants are trained to check meal temperatures and expiration indicators before serving. She either didn't check, or she checked and served it anyway. She served it anyway. We can't prove that conclusively yet, but the investigation is ongoing. What about the airline? What's happening with the partnership review? The board met this morning. They've decided not to terminate the partnerships immediately. Instead, they're using the leverage to push for industry-wide reforms. Your mother's name carries enormous weight right now. Every airline in the country is watching to see what Ellison Holdings does next. The board wants to use this moment to create lasting change, not just punish one company. Zuri leaned against the hospital wall. She was tired, so tired that her bones ached with it. But there was something in Margaret's words that caught her attention and held it. Lasting change. What does that look like? The board is proposing what they're calling the Ellison Protocol, mandatory quarterly bias training for all airline personnel, clear, zero-tolerance policies for discriminatory behavior with automatic termination, independent review boards for passenger complaints, especially complaints from passengers of color, and mandatory food safety verification with dual sign-off before any meal is served to a passenger with medical dietary requirements. The Ellison Protocol, named after your mother and your father. His safety work is referenced throughout the proposal. Zuri closed her eyes. Her father had spent his career trying to make aviation safer. He had died doing it. And now, 3 years later, his name would be attached to reforms that would protect people like her mother from what had happened on Flight 1247. Mama's gonna cry when she hears about this. She's gonna do a lot more than cry. The board wants her back, Zuri, not just as a shareholder, as CEO, when she's ready. Zuri didn't respond to that. It was too big, too much. She filed it away the way she filed everything away, and returned to the immediate task of keeping her mother alive and calm for the next 15 hours. At 8 p.m., Nadine signed the consent forms. Her hand trembled as she made the signature she had practiced hundreds of times since losing her sight, the muscle memory of writing her name, the only thing that remained of the woman who used to sign million-dollar contracts without hesitation. "That's a good signature, Mama," Zuri said. "You're lying. It looks like a drunk spider walked across the page." It looks perfect. At 10 p.m., the hospital quieted. Zuri had arranged for a cot to be brought into the room so she could sleep next to her mother. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the monitors, counting her mother's breaths. Zuri? Yes, Mama? Are you scared? Yes. Me too. But we're doing it anyway. We're doing it anyway. Mama? Yes, baby? When you wake up from the surgery, I'm going to be the first thing you see. I'm going to be standing right there. And I need you to know something before you go under. Whatever happens tomorrow, whether you can see or not, you are the strongest person I have ever known. You survived losing Daddy. You survived losing your sight. You survived what that woman did to you on that plane. And you're going to survive this. Because you're Dr. Nadine Ellison and you don't quit. Nadine's hand found the edge of Zuri's cot and reached across the gap. Zuri met her halfway, their fingers intertwined in the darkness of the hospital room, mother and daughter, connected by touch because sight had been stolen from them. Your father is here, Nadine whispered. I can feel him. He's right here in this room with us. I know, Mama. I felt him all day. He's proud of you. He's so proud of you. He's proud of both of us. At 4:30 a.m., the surgical team began preparations. At 5:15 a.m., the anesthesiologist arrived to start Nadine's IV. At 5:45 a.m., they wheeled Nadine's bed toward the operating room. Zuri walked beside the bed, holding her mother's hand, until they reached the double doors, where family members were not allowed. This is as far as I can go, Mama. Nadine squeezed her daughter's hand so hard it hurt. Zuri Ellison, you listen to me. I am going to close my eyes right now, and when I open them again, the first thing I am going to see is your face. Do you hear me? Your face. I'll be right here, Mama, right on the other side of these doors. I love you more than sight, baby. I need you to know that. Even if this doesn't work, I love you more than seeing. I know, Mama. Now go get your eyes back. The doors closed. The bed disappeared down the hallway. Zuri stood alone in the corridor at 5:52 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in Baltimore, Maryland, and felt the full weight of the last 3 years pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. She walked to the waiting room. She sat down in a plastic chair. She folded her hands in her lap the way her mother folded hers during board meetings. And she waited. At 6 a.m. sharp, Dr. Catherine Shaw picked up the surgical instrument that would either restore Nadine Ellison's sight or confirm that Karen Whitfield's hatred had taken it forever. Scalpel. The operation had begun. 4 hours and 17 minutes. That's how long Zuri sat in that plastic chair without moving. She didn't eat. She didn't drink the water the nurse brought her. She didn't look at her phone. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her eyes fixed on the double doors at the end of the hallway. And she waited, the way soldiers wait for news from the front line. At 10:17 a.m., the doors opened. Dr. Shaw walked through them, and Zuri was on her feet before the doors had finished swinging. She searched the surgeon's face for an answer, the way she had learned to search every face she encountered for information her mother couldn't see. But Dr. Shaw's expression was unreadable, professional, controlled. The mask of a surgeon who had learned to keep the results off her face until she was standing in front of the right person. Zuri, is she okay? The procedure is complete. Your mother is in recovery. Did it work? Dr. Shaw stopped walking. She looked down at this 9-year-old girl who had been carrying a world on her shoulders that would have broken most adults. And for the first time since Zuri had met her, Dr. Shaw's professional mask cracked. Not a lot. Just enough. The graft was successful, the corneal tissue accepted without complication. Zuri, your mother's body did exactly what we needed it to do. Zuri's knees buckled. She didn't fall. She caught herself on the arm of the plastic chair and stood back up immediately because she was Zuri Ellison, and Ellisons don't fall. But her legs shook, and her breath came out in a sound that she had never made before, a sound that lived somewhere between a gasp and a prayer. She can see? Not yet. The bandages need to stay on for 24 hours. When we remove them tomorrow morning, we'll know the extent of the vision restoration. Based on the procedure, I'm optimistic. But I need you to understand that optimistic is not the same as certain. There can be complications in the first 24 hours. Swelling, Inflammation. The graft could still reject during the initial healing phase. The next 24 hours are critical. But you said it was successful. The surgery was successful. Now we need the healing to be successful too. Those are two different things. Zuri nodded. She understood. She had learned a long time ago that winning the battle doesn't mean winning the war. Her mother had won battles in boardrooms that still ended in lost contracts. Her father had landed planes in terrible weather that still needed hours of inspection afterward. Success was a process, not a moment. Can I see her? She's still coming out of anesthesia. Give us 20 minutes to get her settled in recovery, and then, yes, you can be with her. 20 minutes. After 4 hours and 17 minutes of waiting, 20 more felt like a lifetime. Zuri sat back down. She picked up her phone. She sent one message to Margaret Liu. Surgery successful. Graft accepted. Bandages off tomorrow morning. Tell the board. Margaret's response came in 11 seconds. Thank God. The entire company is holding its breath. Your mother has 700 employees praying for her right now. 700 employees. 700 people whose livelihoods were connected to the woman lying in that recovery room. 700 families that Nadine and David Ellison had built careers for. Zuri thought about that number and felt the weight of legacy settle onto her shoulders, the way it had been settling, piece by piece, since the day her father died. At 10:41 a.m., a nurse named Patricia came through the doors and said, "She's asking for you." Zuri walked through those double doors and down the recovery hallway and into the room where her mother lay with white bandages wrapped around her eyes and an IV in her arm and monitors beeping steadily and her hand reaching out into empty air, searching for the one thing she always reached for first. "Zuri? I'm here, Mama." She took her mother's hand and held it against her own cheek so Nadine could feel the tears that Zuri had finally allowed to fall. "I'm right here." "Did Catherine tell you?" "She told me. The graft took. It worked, Mama." Nadine's chin trembled. Her free hand came up and touched the bandages over her eyes, gently, the way you touch something sacred. "I can feel something, Zuri, behind the bandages. It's different. It's not just dark anymore. I think there's light." Zuri's heart stopped. Light? Just pressure and light, like when you close your eyes and face the sun. It's not vision, but it's not nothing either. For 3 years, it's been nothing. And now, there's something. Zuri pressed her forehead against her mother's hand and cried. Not the controlled, dignified tears of a CEO's daughter. Not the brave, measured tears of a child who had learned to be strong. She cried like a 9-year-old, openly, messily, with her whole body shaking and sounds coming out of her that she didn't know she had inside her. 3 years of carrying her mother. 3 years of being the eyes and the strength and the wall between Nadine and the world. 3 years of never being allowed to be small. All of it poured out of her in that recovery room. "Oh, baby," Nadine whispered, pulling Zuri closer. "Oh, my baby, come here, come here." "I was so scared, Mama. I was so scared it wasn't going to work, and you were going to be in the dark forever, and it was going to be because of that woman on the plane, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't protect you from everything." "You protected me from everything that mattered. You have been protecting me since the day your father died, and I am so sorry, Zuri. I am so sorry that you had to." "Don't be sorry. Just see me tomorrow. That's all I want. Just see me." "I will, baby. I promise you, I will." They stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter, the darkness and the light, the woman who had lost everything, and the child who had refused to let her lose one more thing. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Dr. Shaw entered the recovery room with her surgical team. Zuri was already standing. She had been standing since 5:30, positioned exactly where she needed to be, so that when those bandages came off, her face would be the first thing her mother's healing eyes would try to find. "Nadine, we're going to remove the bandages now. I need you to keep your eyes closed until I tell you to open them. The light sensitivity will be intense. We're going to do this gradually." "I understand." Dr. Shaw's hands were steady. 26 years of surgery had given her hands that didn't shake. She unwound the first layer of gauze, then the second, then the protective padding. Nadine's closed eyelids were swollen and bruised, but the incision sites were clean. No signs of infection, no signs of rejection. Nadine, I'm going to dim the lights. When I tell you, I want you to open your eyes very slowly. If you see anything at all, even just light and shadow, that's a positive sign. Don't try to focus, just let your eyes adjust. Okay, open your eyes. Nadine Ellison opened her eyes for the first time in 3 years. At first, there was nothing, just the same darkness that had swallowed her world on the night David died. Zuri watched her mother's eyelids flutter open and saw nothing change in her expression and felt her heart plummet through the floor. Then Nadine blinked and blinked again, and her brow furrowed in concentration, the same expression she used to wear when studying financial reports, when parsing data, when trying to see something that wasn't immediately obvious. "Catherine," Nadine whispered, "I see light." "Good, that's good. What else?" "Shapes. Blurry shapes. There's someone, directly in front of me. That's your daughter." Nadine's damaged eyes struggled to focus. The world was a watercolor painting, everything bleeding into everything else, edges dissolving, colors swirling. But directly ahead, standing exactly where she said she would be, was a shape. A small shape. A shape that was becoming clearer with every blink, every second, every heartbeat. "Zuri?" "I'm here, Mama. I'm right here." Nadine blinked again and again, and the shape began to resolve. Brown skin, dark hair pulled back in braids, a face that was rounder than the one she remembered, older, changed by 3 years of growing up without being seen. And eyes, dark brown eyes that were wide open and streaming with tears and looking directly into hers. "Oh my God!" Nadine's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, Zuri! Can you see me? You're so big. You're so big, baby. You were 6. You were 6 years old, and now you're... Oh God, you look just like your father." Zuri broke. Whatever wall she had left, whatever composure she had been maintaining, whatever strength she had been borrowing from some reserve that 9-year-olds shouldn't have, it all collapsed. She threw herself forward and buried her face in her mother's chest and sobbed, while Nadine wrapped both arms around her daughter and stared at her with eyes that were blurry and imperfect and miraculous. "I can see you," Nadine kept saying, over and over, like a prayer she had given up on that had just been answered. "I can see you. I can see you. I can see you." Dr. Shaw stepped back. She motioned for her team to leave the room. She closed the door behind her and stood in the hallway and pressed her back against the wall and allowed herself 30 seconds of tears that she would never show to anyone. 26 years, thousands of surgeries, and she had never, not once, experienced a moment like that. The next 3 days were a blur of medical evaluations, vision tests, and careful, gradual exposure to light and color, and the world that Nadine hadn't seen in 3 years. Her vision stabilized at approximately 80%. She would never have perfect sight again. But 80% was enough to see her daughter's face. 80% was enough to read a contract. 80% was enough to walk through an airport without a white cane. 80% was enough. On the 4th day, Zuri turned her mother's phone back on. "Mama, there's something I need to tell you, and I need you to stay calm because Dr. Shaw will kill us both if your blood pressure spikes." That's not a reassuring opening, Zuri. The videos from the plane went viral. Over 100 million views now. The airline's CEO resigned. The FAA is investigating. The NAACP issued a statement. Congress is holding hearings. And, Zuri paused, the board wants you back as CEO. Nadine was quiet for a very long time. She sat on the edge of her hospital bed and looked at her daughter with eyes that could finally see and processed information the way she always had, completely, methodically, with the strategic mind that had built an empire. How bad was the fallout for the airline? Their stock dropped 11% total. They've lost 2 major corporate contracts. 3 of their senior executives resigned in solidarity with Richard Graves. And they've asked Ellison Holdings to help them rebuild. They want us to help them rebuild. Yes. After their employee assaulted me and tried to feed me rotten food and called my daughter a racial slur. Yes. That's a lot of audacity for a company that almost poisoned a blind woman. Zuri almost smiled. That tone, that sharp, precise, analytical tone. She hadn't heard it in 3 years. That was her mother's boardroom voice. That was the voice of Dr. Nadine Ellison, CEO. "What do you want to do, Mama?" Nadine stood up from the bed. She walked to the window, slowly, still adjusting to the miracle of depth perception and distance and light. She looked out at Baltimore, at the city where doctors had given her back her sight, and she made a decision that would define the rest of her career. "I don't want to destroy them, Zuri. Destruction is easy. Your father didn't build things to tear them down. He built things to make them better. That airline has 7,000 employees, pilots, mechanics, gate agents, flight attendants who aren't Karen Whitfield. 7,000 people who go to work every day and do their jobs with dignity. I'm not going to punish them for one woman's hatred. So what do? I change them. I use every ounce of leverage we have to force reform so deep that what happened to us can never happen to another family. I go back to my boardroom. I sit in the chair your father built for me, and I finish what we started. The Ellison Protocol. Margaret told you. Margaret tells me everything. I've been running your company for the last 4 days, Mama. Somebody had to." Nadine laughed. A real laugh, the kind of laugh that Zuri hadn't heard since before the accident. Full and warm and alive. 9 years old and already running $1 billion company. Your father would have loved this. Daddy would have said I need a raise. Nadine pulled her daughter into a hug and held her with the fierce desperation of a mother who could finally see the child she was holding. She memorized every detail. The braids, the slight gap in Zuri's front teeth that hadn't been there 3 years ago, the tiny scar on her chin from a bicycle fall that Nadine had never seen. Every detail was a gift. Every detail was a prayer answered. 2 weeks later, Nadine Ellison walked into the Ellison Holdings boardroom in Atlanta, Georgia, for the first time in 3 years. She wore a navy suit that Margaret Liu had chosen. She carried no white cane. She wore no dark glasses. And she sat down in the leather chair at the head of the table, the chair that David had custom ordered for her as a gift the day the company turned its first profit. And she looked each board member in the eye. "Good morning. I'm back." The room erupted, not in applause, though there was some of that, in tears. 12 board members, most of whom had known Nadine since the early days of the company, sat around that table and cried. They cried for David. They cried for the 3 years of absence. They cried for the blind woman who had walked back into the light. Nadine gave them 30 seconds. Then she said, "That's enough crying. We have work to do." And they did. Over the next 3 months, the Ellison Protocol was adopted by 14 airlines across the United States. Mandatory bias training, zero-tolerance discrimination policies, independent review boards, dual verification food safety systems. David Ellison's name was on every document because the safety protocols that had been his life's work were now expanding to protect people in ways he never imagined. Karen Whitfield was never heard from publicly again. She was fired, blacklisted, and became the face of a national reckoning about racial discrimination in customer service industries. Her attorney's request for an in-person apology was denied. Her name became a case study in corporate training programs across the country, not as a monster, but as a warning. A warning about what happens when casual racism goes unchecked for 15 years until it detonates in front of the wrong person at the wrong time. Derek Hale kept his job. Nadine personally called his airline's new CEO and said that the one person who had shown genuine accountability during the entire incident should not be punished for the courage it took to stand up after his mistake. Derek was promoted to Vice President of Customer Experience. His first act was to implement the Ellison Protocol across every route in his airline's network. Jessica Pratt, the flight attendant who had stayed silent, resigned. Not because she was fired, but because she couldn't live with the silence anymore. She wrote a letter to Nadine that said, "I am sorry I didn't speak up. I am sorry I chose comfort over courage. Your daughter showed me what I should have been, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be that person. She became a trainer for airline diversity programs. She told her story at every session. She never stayed silent again. Captain James Porter called Zuri 6 months later. "I told you to call me when you're ready to hire pilots, but I couldn't wait. I'm applying to fly for Ellison Regional Airways, if you'll have me." Zuri laughed. "Captain Porter, I'm 9. I can't hire you. You fired a flight attendant at 9. Hiring a pilot should be easy." He was flying Ellison routes within 3 months. Dr. Angela Morris, the trauma surgeon who had documented every word of Karen's abuse, became the Ellison family's personal physician. Her handwritten notes from Flight 1247 were submitted as evidence in the FAA investigation and became part of the permanent record that led to the strongest anti-discrimination enforcement actions in aviation history. And Zuri went back to school. She turned in her overdue homework. She played soccer on Saturdays. She argued with her best friend about which Taylor Swift album was the best. She did the things that 9-year-olds are supposed to do, the things that she had been too busy doing adult work to do for 3 years. But she also did something else. Every night before bed, she opened the notebook she kept under her mattress, the one titled Things People Say About Daddy, and she wrote down everything she remembered from each day, not just about David anymore, about Nadine, too, about Dr. Shaw and Captain Porter and Derek Hale and even Karen Whitfield. She wrote it all down because she understood, even at 9, that stories matter, that the stories we tell about ourselves determine who we become. 1 year after the incident, Zuri stood before an auditorium full of young people at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. She wore a simple dress and flat shoes, and her braids were pulled back the way her mother used to wear her hair in early photos from the company's founding. "When I was 9 years old," she said, "a woman on an airplane told my blind mother that spoiled food was what people like us eat. She grabbed my mother's hand and tried to force her to eat it, and everyone in first class watched. Some of them recorded it. Some of them looked away. But nobody stood up. Not one adult stood up." She paused. The auditorium was silent. So I did. Not because I'm special. Not because I'm brave. I stood up because my father taught me that silence is permission. When you see something wrong and you say nothing, you're saying it's okay. And it's not okay. It was never okay. My mother lost her sight in the same accident that killed my father. She spent 3 years in the dark. She spent 3 years hiding from the world because grief convinced her that she didn't deserve to be seen. And then a stranger on an airplane confirmed every fear she had, that the world didn't want her, that she didn't belong, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps people threw at her. But here's what that woman didn't know. My mother is Dr. Nadine Ellison. She built an airline empire. She employs 700 people. She changes lives every single day. And the woman who tried to break her didn't break anything. She woke something up. She woke up the fighter that my mother had buried under 3 years of grief. And she woke up something in me that I didn't know was there. Zuri looked out at the young faces watching her. Some were crying, some were recording. All of them were listening. You don't have to be a billionaire's daughter to stand up. You don't have to be powerful or connected or important. You just have to decide that you matter, that the person next to you matters. That respect isn't something you earn by being rich or successful enough. It's something you deserve because you're human. My father died serving an industry he loved. My mother went blind because she was standing where love put her, waiting for him to come home. And a 9-year-old girl had to stand up on an airplane and demand the basic dignity that every human being deserves. That's not a hero story. That's a failure story. We failed as a society so badly that a child had to do what adults wouldn't. She took a breath. The auditorium held its breath with her. So here's what I'm asking you. Don't wait for a 9-year-old to do your job. When you see someone being mistreated, stand up. When you hear someone being disrespected, speak up. When a blind woman is being force-fed rotten food on an airplane, don't sit there and record it. Get out of your seat and say something. Be the adult that nobody on Flight 1247 was willing to be. After the speech, a little girl named Maya approached Zuri. She was 7 years old, with braids and a dress that was slightly too big for her, and eyes that held the same question that every black child carries at some point in their life. "Ms. Zuri, kids at school say mean things about my skin. My mama says be polite and don't cause trouble. But it hurts. What do I do?" Zuri knelt down until she was eye level with Maya. She took both of the little girl's hands in hers and held them the way her mother held hers, firmly, gently, with purpose. "Maya, being polite is important. Your mama is right about that. But polite doesn't mean quiet. You can be polite and still say, 'Don't talk to me that way.' You can be kind and still say, 'I deserve better.' You can be respectful and still refuse to be disrespected. Those things aren't opposites. They're the same thing." "But what if they don't listen?" "Then you say it louder. And if they still don't listen, you find someone who will. A teacher, a parent, a friend. You keep talking until someone hears you. Because your voice matters, Maya. Not someday, right now, today. Your voice matters because you matter." Maya hugged her, small arms around Zuri's neck, squeezing with the desperate strength of a child who had just been given permission to take up space in a world that kept trying to make her small. That night, on the flight home, Nadine sat next to her daughter in first class on an Ellison Regional Airways aircraft. The flight attendant who greeted them was Chelsea Banks, 24 years old, Black, from Southside Chicago, who had applied for the job the day after she saw the video from Flight 1247. "Dr. Ellison, Ms. Zuri, welcome aboard. Is there anything I can get you?" Zuri looked at her mother. Nadine looked back. And for the first time in 3 years, they looked at each other. Really looked. Eyes to eyes. Mother to daughter. The woman who had lost everything and found it again, and the child who had carried the world until the world was ready to carry itself. "Just treat us like everyone else," Zuri said, "with respect and dignity. That's all we've ever wanted." Chelsea smiled. That's all anyone should ever have to want. The plane lifted off into the evening sky over Memphis. Nadine reached for Zuri's hand the way she had been reaching for it for 3 years, by instinct, by love, by the unbreakable bond between a mother who couldn't see and the daughter who saw everything. But this time, when their fingers met, Nadine turned her head and watched. She watched her daughter's small hand wrap around hers. She watched the light from the window play across Zuri's skin. She watched her daughter's face in profile, so much like David's, so much like her own, and she memorized every detail with the ferocity of a woman who had lived in the dark for 1,000 days and would never waste a single moment